All right, so we're diving into something a little bit different today, something that's, uh, I think probably on a lot of people's minds right now,
Yeah, definitely.
especially if you live anywhere near Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
And that is the recent fire in Griffith Park. I know it's been all over the news, and you've probably seen the images, but we're going to go a little deeper here.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, Beyond just what happened, early Tuesday morning when this thing started and quickly exploded to over 1,500 acres.
Right.
And we want to kind of get into the why.
Absolutely.
And what it means for not just Los Angeles, but areas that are susceptible to these kinds of fires.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of those areas out there these days.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, obviously dry conditions, strong winds. We always hear about the Santa Ana winds playing a role in these things. So maybe you can kind of break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah.
How do those factors contribute to a fire like this becoming so massive so quickly?
Yeah. So, I think the term perfect storm gets thrown around a lot.
Right.
But in this case, I think it's really appropriate because you have, several factors that are all coming together at the same time to create, a really dangerous situation. And you mentioned the Santa Ana winds, and those are really kind of the key ingredient here. They come down from the mountains.
Right.
They're hot. They're dry. They can gust, up to 50, 60 miles an hour sometimes, and they just suck the moisture out of everything.
Yeah. I've never personally experienced Santa Ana winds, but I've heard stories.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like it's not just wind. It's like a force of nature.
It is. It really is. And, it's not just the wind itself. It's the dryness that comes with it, that just dries out the vegetation, makes it incredibly flammable. And then, you get a spark, whether it's from a downed power line or, somebody's, carelessly discarding a cigarette or whatever it is. Right. And that spark just explodes.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
It is.
So, we see these images of the flames, and it's, obviously incredibly dramatic and scary. But I think what sometimes gets lost is the human impact. The people who are, displaced from their homes, the potential loss of life, the trauma that this kind of event can inflict on a community.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about thousands of people who have been evacuated from their homes.
Yeah.
Many of whom, don't know if their homes are still standing. They're in shelters. They're, staying with friends or family. And there's just this huge sense of uncertainty and fear.
Yeah.
And, beyond that, you have the long-term impacts on, people's health. The air quality is just, it's terrible right now.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine.
The smoke from these fires can travel for miles, and it's full of particulate matter that can cause all sorts of respiratory problems.
Right. And it's not just, the immediate area around the fire. It's like you said, it can travel for miles.
Yeah.
And affect people who are, nowhere near the actual flames.
Exactly. And, we're also talking about the environmental impact. Your Griffith Park is this, beautiful natural area.
Yeah, it's iconic.
It is. It's iconic. And, it's home to all sorts of, plant and animal life.
Right.
And, a fire like this can just devastate an ecosystem like that.
Yeah. What kinds of, what are we talking about in terms of the specific environmental damage here?
Well, you're talking about the loss of trees and vegetation, which, provides habitat for animals. It helps to prevent erosion. It helps to clean the air, all of those things.
Right.
And then you have the potential for, soil contamination from the retardants that they use to fight the fire.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. So there are all sorts of, kind of cascading effects that can happen from a fire like this.
Yeah. It's really... It's sobering to think about.
It is.
And, this isn't the first time we've seen this happen in California.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's probably not going to be the last.
Yeah, definitely not.
So the question becomes, what can we do to prevent these kinds of things from happening, or at least mitigate the damage?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of different approaches that people are talking about.
Okay.
One is, better forest management.
Right.
Making sure that, we're clearing out underbrush.
Right.
Doing controlled burns to reduce the amount of fuel that's available.
Which I know is controversial.
It is controversial.
But, I think there's a growing consensus that it's a necessary evil.
I think so, too.
And then, there's also the issue of urban planning. How do we build communities
Right.
in a way that is more fire resistant?
Yeah, and that's a really important point. As we see more and more development happening in these wildland urban interface areas,
Right.
we really need to be thinking about how to design those communities in a way that reduces the risk of fire.
So what does that look like? I mean, what are some of the things that can be done in terms of urban planning?
Well, one thing is creating defensible space around homes.
Okay.
And that basically means, clearing out vegetation for a certain distance around the house,
Right.
using fire-resistant materials for landscaping,
Okay.
making sure that, there are no, tree limbs hanging over the roof, things
Right.
like that.
So it's like creating a buffer zone.
Exactly. It's creating a buffer zone that can help to slow down or even stop a fire from reaching the house.
Okay.
Another thing is thinking about the types of materials that are used in construction.
Right.
Using fire-resistant siding, using, non-combustible roofing materials,
Yeah,
things
right.
like that.
So it's like building with fire in mind.
Yes. Building with fire in mind.
Yeah.
And then, there's also the issue of early warning systems.
Right.
Making sure that people have, adequate warning when a fire is approaching.
Right.
So that they can evacuate safely.
And that's something that, technology can really play a role in.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the ability now to, track fires in real time.
Right.
To send out alerts to people's phones.
Right.
To use social media to disseminate information.
Right.
So, there's no reason why people should be caught off guard by a fire.
Right. I mean, you would hope that in this day and age,
Yeah.
with all the technology we have,
Yeah.
we would be able to at least give people a heads up.
Absolutely.
So, we've talked about all these different factors, but there's one big one that we haven't really addressed yet, and that's climate change.
Right.
How does climate change fit into all of this?
Well, climate change is really exacerbating the problem of wildfires in a number of ways, as temperatures rise.
Right.
We're seeing more extreme heat events,
Right.
which are drying out vegetation.
Right.
We're also seeing changes in precipitation patterns.
Okay.
In some areas, we're getting less rain.
Right.
In other areas, we're getting more rain, but it's coming all at once.
Right. So it's not really soaking into the ground.
Exactly. That's really soaking into the ground. It's just running off.
Right.
And then, we're also seeing changes in wind patterns.
Okay.
Which can make fires spread more quickly and more unpredictably.
So it's like climate change is creating this kind of perfect storm.
Yeah, it really is.
For these mega fires.
Exactly.
And it's scary to think about.
It is.
Because it's not just California. It's, we're seeing this all over the world.
We are. We're seeing it in Australia. We're seeing it in the Amazon.
Right.
We're seeing it in Europe.
Right.
It's a global problem.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call, I think.
It is.
And, it makes me think about, what does the future hold?
Yeah.
What are we going to do about this?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And, I don't have all the answers.
Right.
But I think, one thing that we need to do is really start thinking about how we can adapt to a changing climate.
Okay.
We need to be building more resilient communities.
Right.
We need to be investing in, new technologies and new approaches to fire management.
Right.
And, we need to be working together.
Yeah.
To address this challenge, because it's not something that any one person or any one organization can solve on their own.
Right. It's going to take a collective effort.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Oh, that's my pleasure.
This fire, it's obviously a tragedy, but I think it's also an opportunity to learn and to grow and to hopefully prevent these kinds of things from happening.
I hope so, too.
In the future. So for our listeners out there, what can they do? What's one thing that they can take away from this conversation?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just to be aware. Be aware of the risks of wildfires.
Okay.
Be aware of the steps that you can take to protect yourself and your property.
Right.
And, be an advocate for change.
Okay.
Support policies that are aimed at addressing climate change and reducing the risk of wildfires.
Right. Yeah. Get involved.
Get involved. Exactly.
Well, thank you again for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And for our listeners, we'll be back next week with another deep dive.
Until then, stay safe.
And stay informed.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
You too. All right.